Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
We're on to our second presentation, which is about the implicit cost of public school in New York City, and Thomas is going to kick things off, and he's missing the clicker because somebody stole it from the other team. There we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thomas Patino, and I go to Skidmore College, and today we're going to talk about the cost of public school. Every child in America is entitled to a free public education, but there are some hidden costs that each parent has to pay in order to send their kids to the best schools. Today we're going to analyze that. So the New York City public school system is the largest school system in the entire country, enrolling over 1 million students each year. New York City is known to have one of the best performing schools and one of the worst performing schools. And entrance to these schools are largely tied to where one lives. So as a parent, you will want to find out where the best schools are to enroll your kids. And we looked at the test scores of the Regents exams. The Regents exams are taken from 3rd to 8th grade and then taken in the subjects of English and math. So we took this data found from the Department of Education, and they have the mean scores per each grade at each particular school. So we took this data and we plotted it to see the distribution among all the schools in the New York State, not just New York City. So we separated by each school by the bureau, and each bin represents the number of schools that there are. We converted the mean scores to percentiles to better better compare and contrast the different schools, 0 being one of the worst performing schools and 100 being one of the best performing schools. And as you can see here, there's a huge disparity. In the Bronx, we found that there's a large number of schools that are worst performing. And we see in Manhattan a huge disparity, a huge gap. We have 40 of the worst schools in the entire state and 50 of the best schools in the state, but little in between. So we wanted to figure out where the schools were. So we took these shape files from the New York City Open data, and each line represents a school zone boundary. And we took this shape file and we joined it with our region exam data, and we got this graph. So as you can see, the red is that the schools are in the bottom quartile, and the blue means that the school is in the top quartile. And as you can see, there are some schools that are really worst performing next to schools that are really the best performing schools. And we can see this in Midtown. Midtown is very expensive to live in, but yet your school zone boundary determines whether you go to a worst performing school or top performing schools. So if we zoom into that, we can see PS 111 and PS 59. PS 111 is ranked worse than 60% of all schools in the state. And it ranks around 1,300 of 2,300 schools in the entire state of New York. Meanwhile, if you take a 10-minute walk, just 10 minutes, you run into PS 59. PS 59 was the best school out of 99% of all schools in the state, ranking 19 of all elementary schools. And these are just next to each other. And you can see how parents can worry that the school zone boundaries can lead their kids in a worse performing school or in a good performing school. So, and you can see this here in they redid the boundaries of the Park Slope area because PS 321 is a really good performing school, it's William Penn, and it was having issues with overcrowding. So they redrew the boundaries, and some kids went from being in one of the best schools in the country to a less than average school and a new school that they didn't know where to perform. This not only affects your kid, but it could also affect your home value. So to talk about this effect that it has on the home value, my colleague Anastasia is going to talk about that.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anastasia, and I go to Queen's College. So let's continue with presentation. The main question we ask ourselves during our research: how much more expensive are homes in high-performing schools? As Thomas mentioned earlier, New York City elementary schools are largely tied with school zones. Therefore, we look at home prices across various school zones. We found that there are many factors tied to home location, for instance, like quality of neighborhood, subways, amenities, and accessibilities that made it for us really difficult to isolate the school effect. But we use the sharp changes in school quality. For instance, we computed the average of math and English test scores. We looked at achievement rating of students, environment rating of schools, to control these factors small geographical regions. Our ideal experiment, of course, would be to sell two identical apartments into different school zones so that they're just right next to each other over the border here, and then basically measure the price difference. But as you know, we cannot do this in real life. So what we could do, basically, we just took the data, we observed and compare historical sales of similar apartments, and then we could control different factors such as neighborhood, school performance, or demographics. Our data comes from Street Easy, that is one of the biggest New York City real estate websites. And basically, we issued search by school. If we specify the school, we can get about 200 sales. But as you know, New York City has 800 elementary schools. So we would have to perform 800 search requests, but of course we are scientists, so we are too lazy, we wouldn't do that. What we do, we built a Python web scraper that did this really dirty job for us, so we were very happy. After we collected our data, we found several big issues. First of all, some square footage was missing, and we had negative amount of bedrooms and bathrooms. Yes, pretty easy. Well, but our main issue was actually that apartment address was incorrectly matched to school zone. So we had to build another Python script to geocode addresses using New York City GeoClient APIs. As you can see here, it's basically the string with the address. So this is the output in a JSON format. Basically, we have all the necessary information regarding this address, but we were interested only in latitude, because we wanted basically to map each apartment to its corresponding school shapefile. That shapefile we got from New York City Open Data. For instance, here you can see we found latitude and longitude for 11th Street in Brooklyn. And using this latitude and longitude, we basically matched to the corresponding school zone. And also we computed the price per square foot. We divided total price by square foot, and this led us to compare different sizes of apartments. In total, we collected 40,000 distinct sales, but only 10,000 of them had complete details, and so that we could map to the corresponding school zones. As you can see in this map, it represents apartment distribution by price, and each dot represents individual sale. Red color represents the lowest price per square foot, and blue color represents the highest price per square foot. We found that there is a huge disparity in price per square foot in 5 boroughs. So for instance, you can see in Woodlawn, Bronx, where are the lowest performing schools, the price per square foot is around $110 per square foot. While in Manhattan, around Central Park South, the price is really high, around $3,400. So our next step was actually to compare apartment prices versus school performance. In this graph, y-axis represents average price per square foot, and x-axis represents school performance compared to each other school in New York State. 0 represents the lowest performance, and 100 the highest performance, and each dot represents individual school. This red line is a smooth average, basically says as price per square foot increases, school quality increases too. So basically, and this gray shadow is a confidence interval that suggests there is some uncertainty in our prediction, and as it grows wider, it just says there is more uncertainty in your prediction. Let's look at bronze. As you can see, prices don't grow really much, and bronze has the lowest performance in the whole New York State. But if we look in Manhattan, we can see that there is a certain trend. As the school quality increases, the price per square foot increases too. But still, we cannot say confidently that price per square foot increases only because of school quality, or maybe there is some different factors that affect it, such as neighborhood quality, or maybe location. So our next question was, how do we actually distinguish between the effects of neighborhoods and schools? And to answer these questions, my colleague Riley will talk more about our model.
Alrighty. So how can we actually get the premium price associated just with the school? With infinite amounts of sales data, we could just average the price in each school zone and then compare that to the neighboring school zones to just grab this price associated with school. But with a limited amount of data, we need a model to estimate the average sale price per square foot, accounting for the apartment, the neighborhood, and various school features. And with those estimates, we can compare the price per square foot in one school zone to those around it. And so we define this premium that we want to get in theory as the average price in one zone versus the average price in neighboring zones. And so we built a model, and we're going to use this model to grab an estimated set of prices per square foot in various school zones. So what we'd like to do is gather all possible information about a neighborhood and control for certain features so that we can just isolate that portion associated with the school. We can't, so we used regularization to try to select important features and avoid unreliable estimates of prices in that area. So we have a linear model to predict the sale price per square foot, which takes, which again spits out that, and is reliant on the number of bedrooms in the apartment, the number of bathrooms, the demographics in the local school, the test scores in the local school, the actual neighborhood, the school ID, which is the school itself, and this interaction here of the number of bedrooms and the school zone. So why take an interaction? You can imagine that for, say, a studio, somebody who's buying a studio doesn't really have a family. They're not thinking about, what the school in the area is. So they're in that area. They're going to be less reliant on. They're not looking at the school when they're considering a move. But for maybe a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom apartment, you can expect those people are more likely to have a family to take up the extra space, and thus they will be more reliant on the school. So this particular interaction is trying to capture the differences over the number of bedrooms. Okay. How well did our model do? So if you look at the plot we have here, so this is the actual mean price by school zone. Each one of these dots represents a school zone. So this is the actual mean price calculated based on the data versus our model's prediction price for that school zone. Like I said, as far as an average. We've separated them out by color for each borough, and as you can see, Manhattan kind of rises to the top, and the Bronx, settles there at the bottom. And if you would to pick an individual school, say around 1,000, and we predicted that school perfectly, it should lie exactly on this line. So the fact that all of our points here are kind of gathered around the line is really telling us that our predictions are doing pretty well. So for an individual sale, we had a median absolute deviation for overall boroughs of $103 per square foot. So essentially we just took our real number and subtracted from the prediction and picked the middle one as a good idea of how well we were doing on individual sales. And as you can see, for each individual borough, we're doing a little bit better, a little bit worse. For Brooklyn, we were off by about 95, Queens 67, Staten Island 71, Manhattan 138, and the Bronx 48. So these numbers are nice, but you're looking at a lot of tables. It's kind of hard to see, and then the numbers for the ID, the school, are kind of obscure. So we wanted to kind of plot on to see what this looks like on a map, to kind of make sense of it. And anybody who lives in New York City kind of can look at this map and understand, the logic that goes into this. So as you can see up here, we're taking the predicted price for only 2-bedroom, 2-bathrooms in each school zone. So as we saw here, where we have in the Bronx, in the Bronx here, very north, it's very cheap. So that's, up to $500 per square foot. Down here in South Brooklyn, it's also very cheap. And as you kind of creep in toward Manhattan, we're getting more expensive. So you can see we have like little areas here very close to Manhattan that are getting more expensive. And of course, Midtown Manhattan, Upper West and East Sides are really ridiculously priced. So up to, and over $1,500 a square foot. So to try to get a good estimate of the ideal model that Anastasia mentioned, which kind of takes like two locations just over a boundary, similar neighborhoods, very close together, we kind of zoomed in on Park Slope. Just a reminder that the premium for the school in an area is the average price per square foot in that zone minus the average price per square foot in the neighboring zones. So we have two school zones in Park Slope here. The bottom one is PS 321. The top one is PS 282. PS 321 is pretty much like the school to be at in Park Slope. And PS 282 is not as good as 321, but just north of here is the major Atlantic Avenue hub in Brooklyn. So essentially like that downtown Brooklyn area right there. But as we can see, despite the neighborhood being more ideal because it's so much closer to that hub, this is the larger price here. You're paying $1,029 per square foot in the 321 area and only $945 in the 282 area, despite its proximity to the subway. So for this maybe half-mile distance extra, it seems right here that the difference in school is showing up pretty clearly. So we kind of zoomed out and took this for each school zone based on the neighboring school zones going through all of New York City. And we can kind of see this area right here that Thomas mentioned, where the Midtown West area had a very poor performing school, but the areas nearby had much better performing schools. So you can see that despite all of the prices here being extremely expensive, you actually are paying less to be in this worse school zone. And well, all of this is really nice, but it's kind of flat, static, and so I would really like maybe an interactive version of this, and I will leave it to Glenda to take that away for us.
Hi guys, I'm Glenda Asensio. As you saw, many areas in each borough has a disproportionate prices compared to the area around them. Recall the Midtown West, apartments are still expensive there, but there is a negative premium compared to the surrounding areas. In the beginning, this wasn't obvious by just looking at the data tables, but there was a way to see of the school zones and find and hover and see where in what school zones we have a positive or negative premium. That would be cool to do. So this is why our group decided to create an app that maps out all the school zones in New York City and color codes them by price. Let me go to the app. Oops. Oh. One might be wondering, what motivated us to make this app? And the answer is really simple. We wanted to allow all the New York citizens to be able to explore the average prices, the median prices, and the premium prices in each school zone. And at the same time, we also wanted to make it clear and more, we also wanted to analyze the data because we saw in Street Easy there, like Anastasia said, that there were a lot of repeated data. And with this app, we're able to, when we hover and click on it, we were able to see like where you saw a lot of school districts or school zones together over there. So you saw a mistake. You saw that was a mistake. And the app is really easy to use. Yeah. So you see, we have the main panel over here, and we also have the features that we can choose here. When you are in this tab, in the average price tab, you can just, you can just zoom in the map and see what is the average price in this school zone in PS234. And then let's see, if you want to go to this area, you can also see how much, what is the average price, which is this one. You can see that is higher. PS34 is higher. It has a higher average price than the other one, which is PS3. And this is not the only the cool thing about this app, but let's say that if I'm walking on the street and then I found an address, let's say that is 4012 Fifth Avenue, 641 6th Avenue. I want to buy the house, this apartment or this area, and I want to see what is the average price that I have to pay. And it takes a little bit. All right, there. So let's say that I want to buy. I'm a millionaire, so I want 3 bedrooms and I want one bathroom. So you can see here, I can just zoom in. You can just zoom in here and click on it, and you can see I have to pay $1,746. And the same thing you can do with the median price. Some people think that the median price is better than the average price because, yeah, they just think that it's better. So the same thing, you can see how much do I have to pay in the medium is 1,700. And as Riley said, you want to know what is the average price, what is the premium in the area? Like this is about the map, the static map that Riley was talking about. So you can also do the same. You can just zoom in and you can see how much is the premium, which is minus $67. And if you like to play around, you can just click on the areas and you're gonna see for all of them how much you have to pay. Let's go back to the presentation. So in conclusion, we find extreme inequality in New York City. in New York City schools, often over small geographic regions. Using this variation, we find substantial premiums for neighboring school zones at different quality. And you have to pay $100 per square feet. Oh my God.
All right, let's just talk for a minute.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, so in the future, we would like to include rental prices and add modal features, limiting comparison to zone boundaries, extending and also to send this analysis to additional cities. If you're really interested to see how we program, how we did that statistical analysis, how we made the game and everything, you can just go to GitHub and you click on public school and you're gonna see it there. If you wanna explore the map because you're looking for a house to buy, you can just go to this link. It is already hosted there, and hopefully it can be beneficial for you. And thank you so much for coming to listen to our presentation.
All right. Questions? Andrew's ready. Shoot.
It just looked like a lot of Queens that was missing data about school districts. Can you shed some light on why?
Our Queens resident will answer.
As I said before, we had a lot of data issues. Street Easy didn't have a lot of required data like square foot, or data was repeated, and also because we did our search by school zone, so some areas were unzoned. Basically, this district doesn't have any school zone, so that's why a lot of our data is missing.
Also, about that, one of the issues that I brought up very early on was about Street Easy in particular. Street Easy is looking to kind of make money, so they are focused on areas that are very dense, like Park Slope and Manhattan, which are big sales. So Queens, not so much.
Jennifer.
So in some of the really expensive areas, I would assume that the parents send their kids to private school. Did you see any correlation, like any maybe even negative premium, because in some areas they were so expensive that people didn't care anymore about the quality?
Great. So
of
the question is in the private school areas. I'll just repeat for the.
So the education department is actually not required to read some of the data of the private schools. So it's very difficult to compare the two. And also they set up their own standards. In the New York City public school, they have to abide by Common Core standards. And the private schools do to some extent, but they're not easily comparable. So we had to exclude those.
One thing is that the 282 zone is actually 20% of local residents in there. 15%. So that zone that we showed is actually heavily private as well. Another question? Chandra? you're up.
So you started off the talk mentioning the Park Slope rezoning. Did you have more examples of that? Because it seems like an opportunity to look at if there's a change.
Yeah, so the question was about the rezoning and how we might be able to use that. Anybody have thoughts about that?
Yeah. So there's what happened. This rezoning happened in 2008, and they created a new school. And for those new schools, we have very little historical data. So if we wanted to take a look at other redistricting, we would come up with the same issue that these schools are new, they don't have a historical, and so we don't know how they perform, and it's hard to compare them against other schools.
David?
You mentioned looking at renters next. Before you do it, what's your intuition to the premium that renters would pay relative to the price they pay compared to home buyers?
So the question is, do we think we see the same effect for renters versus buyers?
I do think that we would see some of these same effects. I think that they might potentially be muted since you kind of associate families with trying to buy versus rent because of the associated extra cost with renting. So there might be maybe a slight dampening, but I think in general we'll get similar results.
kindergarten, and then you're in the school. So you can just rent in a zone and, get in and then stay. So it seems like.
Okay, for people on the recording, Amy has a good trick. Rent in a good public school. Question in the back.
Any statistical outliers in any of the schools because of super principal or teaching staff or?
So the question is, could we attribute any of the outstanding performance in the school to a specific attribute of the school?
Yes.
We actually had ratio student per teacher, but we didn't include it in our model because because our model basically didn't improve much, but we had average of English and math test score. And we also, we're playing with environment rating, that is basically how school will perform, and achievement rating, how well students perform. So this had some effect in our model, but still we got rid of it at the end.
There was surprisingly sparse or just bad, ugly data for teachers or just staff in general. Like one of the things we really wanted to look at was the staff, and we just could not find very much that was reliable. So that was another, privacy laws. So, we had to kind of mute that effect by just getting some, test scores.
All right, maybe we'll take one last question.
My question is, as young scholars and college students, when you were exposed to those disparities in high schools, what was your response to it? How do you feel about that?
So the question is, what do you think about the results you found, especially being students of the local schools?
Lucky, I think, was one of the first ones. I mean, these are elementary schools. I think that I went to a fairly good elementary school, but it was nowhere near where I lived. I've never gone to a zone school before. And so I really can't imagine what it would be like to be a student in one of those schools where it's just like, yeah, you have to just go there. And but I wasn't surprised. I expected it like pretty much what we saw, and sad.
And I just forgot what I was just gonna say. Oh, and also, what's most important about all of this, and this is something that cannot be quantified, but it's also that a board with like 8 people can really change the course of the students. That the people who are in the school board can decide, oh, okay, we're gonna chunk up the school, divide it, and this affects people's lives, and not a lot of people have control over that, and that's something that we found that it's troubling, and that people should be more aware about.
In addition, like doing this research really changed my life because I'm like, now if I ever have a child, I'm gonna be sending them in the best schools. And I also hope that you can also send them to a good school so they can have a better education than others.
Riley has one more quick thing.
So one of the things that we actually found kind of interesting is that even though there's not necessarily too much difference in the school, like one is maybe a little bit better, there were some zones where the price actually kind of went a good amount down. So there might be some ways to, still get in a good school zone, but not pay the extra good school zone price.
All right, so the students will be around. There's 2 posters out that have their results summarized. You should attack them all and ask them all the questions you didn't get to ask, and enjoy some food and refreshments. Thanks, everyone.